So for anyone who's never really thought about sleep above, oh, I need 7, 8 hours a night, what's the simplest way to explain what's so fundamental to our health, mood, and our performance?
Well, I suppose in brief, the quality of our sleep defines the quality of our wake. So I think for so long, many people have thought that sleep is an indulgence, a luxury, and it's always the first thing that goes in an overpacked schedule. And yet, when we're asleep, we consolidate memory. We actually solve problems. I mean, one of the things that I find so fascinating is that, night of sleep can enhance our ability to come up with novel solutions to complex problems. Whilst we sleep, we're clearing toxins from the brain. Very recently, there's been the discovery of this, what's called glymphatic system, which is clearing out things like misfolded proteins like beta amyloid, which are associated when they build up with dementia and Alzheimer's. And we actually know that whilst we're asleep, we're getting rid of some of those misfolded proteins. At every aspect of really what makes us such a special species, our ability to solve problems, our sense of humor, our ability to interact with each other, is all enhanced by a night of sleep. It is absolutely a key pillar of health, and it's something that we've got to take seriously.
And somehow, as a society, we've sort of lost the importance of it. We just talked earlier that it's almost 37% of our lives if we do it right.
Yeah.
And yet we sort of treat it as this illness of,
Yeah.
oh, we've got to sleep.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, for so long, it has been treated as an illness in need of a cure. And certainly, I mean, it's not great now, but it's a lot better than it was in the 80s when I was doing my early research experiences. And, often you'd hear people coming in saying, oh, I did another all-nighter. And, the response would be, oh, gosh, yeah, well done.
Yay.
And then you'd realize, well, hang on, this person is less empathetic, more impulsive, less able to process information,
irritable.
and you just don't want people like that in the workplace. And so I think things have shifted. In fact, in some cases, it may have gone too far. I know this may be a bit of a surprise, but I think at the turn of the century, we were thinking, yeah, sleep's kind of important, and we began to take it seriously. But now, I think we've got the sergeant majors of sleep screaming, you must get 8 hours. You can't do this. And you mustn't do that. And in fact, we've lost the fact that it's a very dynamic, flexible behavior. Yes, it's critically important, but one shoe size does not fit all. And the key thing is we shouldn't be listening to sergeant majors. We should be finding out what we as individuals need in terms of our sleep, and not relying on inaccurate apps or these sort of metrics that you've got to get 8 hours. In fact, the healthy sleep range can be something from 6 hours to 10, even 11 hours. And I know, how do you know if you're getting enough sleep? Well, it's straightforward. Are you able to function optimally the next day? And we all know if we're not firing on all cylinders. Do you oversleep extensively on free days, such as the weekend? Do you find yourself doing stupid and unreflective things? Do your friends, family, colleagues say, you're a bit more irritable. You've got less empathy. I don't quite understand, where you're coming from. And so it's those sort of simple behavioral traits that I mean, another classic one, does it take you a long time to wake up after the alarm goes off? Or ideally, you should wake naturally without an alarm. So it's simple to find out if you're getting the sleep that you need.
I think what I've realized is that a lot of people tend to also obsess over the hours they
Yes.
sleep, but you seem to emphasize timing and rhythm
Yeah.
above hours.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
why is that more important than raw sleep
Well, I
quantity?
think it's because everybody's so very different, and to sort of put a metric that we should all, align ourselves to is actually wrong. As I say, it's like shoe size. It would be foolish to all wear the same shoe size, and it's the same for sleep. Again, it's not a fixed behavior. It's dynamic and changeable, and there may be occasions where you do get a little bit less sleep because of a whole range of interacting reasons. And then you need to be sensitive to the fact that if you're going to drive, you need to be aware that you won't be able to drive as effectively. If you haven't had the sleep you need, then you need to delay those difficult conversations with a partner or whomever. And so it's about understanding the impact of sleep loss and optimizing the sleep that you get as much as you possibly can.
And from what I've seen in your research, is you seem to want to show that even if someone sleeps the optimal hours, sleeping them not in sync with what you call the circadian
Yeah.
rhythm, you're still not going to get the quality and the rest your body needs.
Yeah. I mean, a classic example is night shift work, where uh, your whole, the body does not adapt with the demands of working at night. So what you've got to do is override all of this biology saying you should be asleep. And we probably do that by overactivating the stress axis. So you can function, and you can do an okay job, but you won't have optimum performance. And then at the end of the night shift, you go home and you try and sleep. But now the body is saying, hang on, I know you're tired, but this is daytime, so you should be awake. So the quality of the sleep that you get during the day after the night shift is usually quite poor. And again, you need to be aware of this. I mean, there's a study recently on junior doctors, and showing the level of impairment on the way home after the night shift. So 57% said they'd either had a crash or a near miss on the drive home after the night shift. That gives you some sense of the impairment. I mean, in the United States, over 100,000 crashes on the American freeway have been associated with not getting the sleep that people need. And these are serious crashes because, if you fall asleep at the wheel, and I think we've all probably done it from time to time. I've done it once where I did fall asleep. And then, of course, if you don't wake up, the crashes can be catastrophic because you've got no way of stopping, in time if you're going to plow into the back of somebody or into the next lane. I mean, these are serious crashes. And so one's got to be aware of the dangers. If you're going to push it, and we all need to from time to time, you've got to make compensation so that you're not putting yourself and importantly other people in danger.
Circadian rhythm. I feel like the word has been thrown around quite a lot recently, and I don't think people truly understand what it means either.
Okay.
So could you dive into that
Yeah,
for
sure.
me? And is it individually unique, or just as the amount of sleep is variable?
Yeah. There's a lot of individual difference, but if we just sort of think about what our biology is supposed to do, it's supposed to deliver the right stuff at the right concentration to the right tissues and organs at the right time of day. And so you've got this incredible synchrony across all the biological systems of the body. And what provides the timestamp for all of that to occur at the right time and in the right sequence is the circadian system. It's constantly upregulating and downregulating biology in anticipation of the varied demands of activity and sleep. And without a circadian system, biology falls into chaos. And so sleep gets disrupted, our ability to process information, our ability to metabolize effectively. And what you see when that system falls apart is a much higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, immune suppression, greater risk of cancer, huge impact upon our emotions and our vulnerability to mental illness. So essentially, without that organizing, that timestamp, that organizing principle of the circadian system, biology is in free fall, and it's seriously
So
damaging.
in some way, it basically orchestrates how the body functions when it should function.
Yeah.
Where does this actually happen? And is there a specific organ that's doing
Yeah,
this?
I mean, I think it's interesting. We both use the same phrase. I mean, I tend to think of the circadian system as a bit like an orchestra. You have a master conductor producing a signal from which all the component parts of the orchestra align their rhythmic activity. And to address your question, yes, we do have a master clock within the brain at the base of the hypothalamus. So you can imagine where the optic nerves go into the brain. Just above that is a small paired structure called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. It's only about in total 100,000 cells, and that's the master clock. And it is set to the external world using the light-dark cycle. Primarily, there are other factors, but it's mainly light. And then what we thought is that this master clock, because if that part of the brain is destroyed, then rhythmicity falls apart. And so that's why we thought, oh, well, this is forcing rhythms on the rest of the body. But now we know that every cell in the body has the capability of generating a circadian rhythm. It has its own molecular clock. So it really is like an orchestra. You've got the conductor, and then all of the other component parts are there taking a reference cue from the conductor, and they all work together. And of course, if you shoot the conductor, everything starts to fall apart, and you can't do the right thing at the right time. So although we use the term the clock as almost a shorthand, in fact, it's a whole temporal framework. It's a circadian system rather than just a single clock.
And is that clock set at birth then? Or is it influenced throughout your life through different factors?
Yeah, so it can change, or it does change. So there are three really important things about that determine what your circadian rhythms are going to be like. One is your genetics. We now have a pretty good understanding of how that clock is generated. And of course, if you have a clock in a single cell, it must be the product of intracellular molecular mechanisms. And a bunch of genes have been defined. When they're turned on, they make a protein. That protein forms a complex, and that complex then moves into the nucleus and turns off its own genes. The protein is then broken down, and then the whole cycle starts again. So you have this rhythmic production and degradation of these key proteins, and that's at the heart of the molecular clockwork. Now, you can get subtle changes or polymorphisms in those genes and the proteins they make, which can either speed up or slow down the clock. And that's part of the reason you might be an owl, a slightly slower clock, or a lark, a slightly faster clock. But that's not the only thing. So the second thing that tends to happen that can change your chronotype, whether you're a morning person or an evening person, is how old you are. So from about the age of 10, there's a tendency to want to go to bed later and later and later. That peaks in our late teens, early 20s. And then there's a slow move to a more morning chronotype again. And by the time you get to your late 50s, early 60s, you're getting up and going to bed at about the time you got up and went to bed, 10, 11, 12. And of course, what that time frame tells you is that it almost perfectly follows the sharp rise wanting to go to bed later as you go through puberty, and then the slow decline into a more morning chronotype as those sex hormones begin to decline as you age. So a very important role for puberty of the sex hormones in interacting with the clock and making you more of a morning type or an evening type. The bottom line is that somebody in their late teens, early 20s, will want to go to bed on average 2 hours later than somebody in their late 50s, early 60s. So it's a big effect. So we've got genes, we've got development and the interaction with the sex steroids. But the third thing is something we do have a bit of control over. And that's the interaction with light. So morning light advances the clock, makes us get up earlier and go to bed earlier. Whereas dusk light delays the clock. We go to bed later and get up later. Now, we did a study a few years ago on university students all over the world, and we showed that the late chronotypes, the owls, were missing the morning light, which of course made them get up earlier, but they were getting out there, getting the late afternoon, early evening light, and that was shifting the clock to a later time. So when you see light and delaying effects in the evening versus advancing effects in the morning can influence your chronotype. So if you happen to be a terrible late bird, you can actually influence that to some extent. You can set the alarm, force yourself out of bed, and it's a ghastly experience because you then get outside, get some light, or sit in front of a light box, and that will nudge you forward in time. And the great problem, of course, is that with many adolescents, they are chronically tired during during the week. They're not getting enough sleep during the week. Then they massively oversleep at the weekend. They miss that morning light, but get the afternoon, early evening light. And so they're missing the advancing part of the day and only getting to the delaying part of the day, which will shift them to a later time. So the time Monday comes along, they're already shifted to a later time. It's going to be more difficult to get up on a Monday by missing the morning light over the weekend.
I find it interesting how you classify different lights as morning and evening. Is there truly a difference between what time you see the sun at, or is it just
you absolutely it has the effect is really very clear. So I've talked about morning light advancing, delaying light, dusk light delaying, but actually how much light you see during the middle of the day can influence the sensitivity of the clock. So if you spend all your time inside, then you sensitize the clock in the evening to light. So normally, dim light from a computer screen or the television or a bedside lamp will have no effect at all. But if you've only experienced dim light during the day, you sensitize the clock and then you can shift the clock, which means that if you're reading late or you're using a computer late, normally it doesn't matter. But if you've been inside all day, it will have an effect on the clock. It'll shift you later, making it more difficult to get up. So that's why it's not only important to get symmetrical light exposure at dawn and dusk, but get out there during the day and get some light exposure to desensitize your clock in the evening.
That is absolutely incredible. I did not think about that. So yeah, so just staying in and not being exposed to much light at all, you'll be way more sensitive to the evening lights of your laptop,
exactly.
etc.
And this is done with a classic experiment. It was published a few years ago. People were asked to look at a Kindle. And so the experiment was they were brought into the lab. So this is a lab-based experiment. They were kept under 90 lux dim light during the day. Then they were asked to look at a Kindle on its brightest light setting, and it's about 30 lux, for 4 hours immediately before bedtime. And that occurred on 5 consecutive nights. And it had a little bit of an effect on delaying, dusk-like delays, delaying sleep time, and it had some other effects which I won't bore you with. And then, there's this great thing, you shouldn't look at a Kindle before you go to bed. It's going to damage your health, so-called doctors say. And then it was repeated by a group of Scandinavian researchers, and they gave people actually moderate levels of light during the day, and those subtle effects of the Kindle in the evening were completely abolished. So if you are inclined to look at your computer a lot in the evening and do your Kindle, make sure you get out and see late light during the day. Now, I'm not. I've got to be slightly careful here because, of course, using a smartphone or a Kindle or a game console or whatever can affect your sleep. It's not so much the light, if you're getting moderate light levels during the day, but it's the alerting effect. There's wonderful studies, from University of Glasgow, for example, have shown that adolescents who are using smartphones into the early hours of the morning will very much be, their sleep will be delayed. Not the light effect, but it's the fact that the brain is being alerted. And if the brain is alert, it's going to be much more difficult to go to sleep. So I wouldn't recommend using devices before you go to bed, but it's not the light, it's the alerting effect that they have.
Well, what specifically is the alerting effect? What do you mean by that?
It increases your alertness. So if you want to be more alert, increase the lights, and you're much more. Your reaction times will increase. Your ability to process information, your attention will all go up. And these are the things that sort of tend to inhibit your ability to go to sleep.
Okay, so you're saying it's not the evening lights isn't necessarily going to impact too much your circadian rhythm, but it will obviously impact your alertness.
Yes.
Making you obviously going to bed later.
Particularly if it's bright.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So it's, I think there's a lot of nonsense in the literature saying, it's the light from these devices. Not at all. And you may be aware there's screen shift and F-lux, which are these computer programs which shift from blue enriched light during the day to red enriched light in the evening.
Apparently it has no scientific basis.
No scientific basis. No effect, no demonstrable effect at all. And yet you read the media and they say, oh yeah, this is what happens. It's nonsense.
Then let's hop on to then blue light,
Yeah.
because obviously that's also a massive topic that exploded over the last few
Yes.
years, and loads of the products have flooded the
Oh, yeah.
market, such as blue light blockers, as you've mentioned, the softwares. Is blue light really the culprit, or?
Well, so the new photoreceptors that we discovered in the eye, called the photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, which are very different from our visual cells, the rods and cones. So there's this third light sensor within the eye that is grabbing light to regulate the circadian system. And of course, our alerting systems. Now, that we showed was maximally sensitive to blue light. That then led to this whole sort of bandwagon of, we've either got to have lots of blue light or we must eliminate blue light. But the problem is, it's more complicated than that. First of all, we now know that the rods and cones talk to those photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. So the spectral range that the clock can respond to is very broad. And so it's not just blue light. But we've done all these sort of experimental studies showing, yes, this is where those cells are maximally light sensitive, but under normal circumstances, it becomes far less important. If the light is going to be dim and you want to go for the biggest punch, then blue light is probably going to be the most effective, because that's where the pigments in those new cells are maximally sensitive. But under most circumstances, it really isn't going to matter that much, as far as we can tell. You see, people selling SAD lamps and other light boxes which are blue enriched. As long as the light is bright enough, white light is perfectly fine. So there's no need to spend an extra, £100 or whatever to have blue light. Then there's the evidence of using yellow blue blocking glasses to reduce your alertness. And there's a recent review on the papers that have been published on this, and they seem to show no impact whatsoever. A lot of celebrities, go around looking cool in their yellow glasses. Complete waste of time.
It's a trend.
It's a trend. I mean, the extent to which there's a placebo effect here, and a sort of a psychological effect, I think is if people believe it's going to make them less alert and more likely to go to sleep, they could well do.
It's most likely going to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but in terms of randomized controlled trials, empirical evidence, there's no evidence that they have any effect.
What about red light? I've seen loads of people use infrared in the evening to calm the system. You mentioned your discovery in the eye, non-cones. Are they also sensitive to red light in that way?
All photoreceptors have it's like a bell-shaped curve. They peak, and those new receptors peak at what's called 480 nanometers in the blue, but they'll absorb, at longer and shorter wavelengths. And so the peak is a statistical chance of absorbing a wavelength. So at 480, it's 100% chance. At 450 or 540, it'll drop to a 50% chance, but it can still do it. And if the light is bright enough, it doesn't matter what the wavelength is,
because
exactly. It's a statistical chance. And so if you're giving a bright saturating pulse, it really doesn't matter what the wavelength. Now, there's a lot of interest in red light, and not so much with the circadian system, although so for example, people use red and infrared light for if you've got a strain or a muscle tear or there's some tissue damage, you put this red infrared light on it. And some arguments have been suggested that it's mitochondria absorbing, using cytochrome C, absorbing the red light. That produces a whole chain of stuff, including nitric oxide, and that's causing the fixation of the tissue. The evidence for that is really weak. And yet again, that's what people say is the mechanism. My view, and it's only a suggestion, is that what we know about heat, infrared light, is that it is warming. If you warm the skin, you're going to get increased blood flow to the skin. What increased blood does bring nutrients and the immune system, which is going to clear up the damage and help fix damaged tissues.
So especially the infrared lights.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I know there's different. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that for me at least, I'm more inclined to the view that it's a warming effect rather than any sort of weird interaction using mitochondria and the release of nitric oxide. And the frustrating thing is, if it is that mechanism, and it could be, the experiments are easy enough to do to prove it, and yet they haven't been done. And I find that frustrating because the people that are pushing this, and they have a commercial interest in this, know damn well what to do to do the right experiments, and they're not.
There might be a reason for
Well,
that. Maybe they're hiding
call
something.
me an old cynic if you like. Yeah.
Because I mentioned red light because I don't know if you're on YouTube or Instagram much, but there's more and more content creators and sort of like lifestyle influencers that sort of use these red lights in the evening, and they double them with their obviously red glasses, which you have somehow disproved. And they claim obviously that it's about the same system as the glasses, that it helps diminish the blue lights if you're ever using your screens or any source of light that has more blue light, and the red light will then diminish those blue lights. So would then external red lights or infrared lights actually help in any way for our sleep before going to bed?
I mean, they're much less likely to interact with the circadian photoreceptors, but most of the time that's not going to be an issue. So the key thing about these photoreceptors is that they need light that is bright and for a long period of exposure. So you'll again read papers saying, oh, well, 90 lux in the evening is going to shift the clock. But that's based upon lab-based studies, which, yes, they did get an effect, but it took 6.5 hours of exposure at 90 lux to have an effect. So people are confusing, the intensity versus the duration. And low light, yes, it could have an effect, but it needs one heck of a lot of exposure to get an effect. And 6.5 hours is a long period of light exposure. So in theory, it could have an effect, yes, but you need an awfully long time of exposure. And so the guidelines that are going out, I mean, there's somebody suggested recently saying, well, people shouldn't see more than 30 lux an hour before they go to bed. Well, again, that's based upon lab-based studies where they were kept under dim light during the day, and long duration light exposures. Now, if you're an elderly individual at risk of falling, you certainly don't want to be wandering around under really dim levels of light before you go to bed. Just keep the light relatively low, make sure you've been out during the day, and normal levels of light in the evening are not going to have much of an effect, if anything.
So we've talked about how light impacts us when we're going to sleep or before we sleep or during the day. How does light impact us when we're in the middle of sleeping and then we wake up and reach for our phones and see that bright light for a few seconds, or if we have to go to the toilet and have to put those lights on? How impactful and how destructive are those lights for us?
In terms of the amount of light you get from looking at a phone or something, it's not going to have much of an effect. Again, it's the key thing is the alerting effect. And so if you possibly can, keep the smartphone out of the bedroom. Use some other alarm clock. An old-fashioned mechanical alarm clock, and so that you're not then tempted to have a quick look. I mean, we're all prone to this. I remember this does date me. When I first got my BlackBerry, I was working in Australia. So and those of you who remember a BlackBerry used to have this sort of red light that used to glow when you had a message. And so, during the day in Australia, the Australian emails would come in. And then, of course, in the evening it would be the European ones, and then after that it would be the American ones. And so if you've got jet lag and you're not sleeping that well, and you've got the BlackBerry by your phone or your smartphone these days,
You're just tempted to reach for
so
it.
in the end I was so weak I literally had to leave the BlackBerry in the lab.
Outside of the bedroom.
Yeah, well, no, I
Wow.
started outside the bedroom in the next room, and I was still, because I was sort of jet lagged, and I was thinking, oh, I'll have a quick wander around. And instead of having a quick wander around, keeping the lights low, I then see the emails and think, oh my God, I've got to deal with this now. And so as I say, it's not the light, it's the alerting effect these devices provide. And we've got to, and it's very difficult to be, have that self-control. I do now, but I didn't to begin with. I don't look at emails or texts or anything else that might. If I do wake up, it's just a really bad idea. I mean, if I do wake up, and many of us do as we age, in particular, I will get back to sleep by listening to Radio 4 Extra, a short play, something relaxing. I mean, my favorite is In Our Time with Melvin Bragg. And anything to do with Chinese porcelain, I'm away in about 5 minutes. But it's not because it's not because
Chinese porcelain.
Yeah, it's not because it's uninteresting. It's just completely non-threatening, and I liken it to, as a child, we used to have bedtime stories, which were soothing and gentle, and I think this is what these things do for me. They relax me. It's not part of my world, and it's something that I can focus on, and get me off to sleep.
So I'm just going to summarize this very quickly. So I'm sure I've understood and the audience has understood. So circadian rhythm is very sensitive to light, but not as sensitive as we think it is. It's more on a long period of time during the day and a accumulation of events and how much you're exposed to light, and thus how sensitive you become to light during that day. And the peaks of light you do have before bed or in the middle of the night aren't really related to circadian rhythm, but rather to your alertness levels, which then spikes the brain to be active and then makes sleeping more difficult.
Yes, it's the alerting effect, which reduces your ability to fall asleep. Yeah, exactly.
Because I feel like people confuse
they
those
do,
two.
And it's a constant battle I have. When I talk to journalists, and I have to sort of say, "This is the situation," and it's
two different things.
Exactly, two different things. Yeah, and it's these sort of myths. It's a bit. I mean, we're going to get into other myths now. It's like melatonin, being a sleep hormone. It is emphatically not. It's a biological marker of the dark. It can have a very mild modulation effect on sleep, but there are people who don't have any melatonin at all, and their sleep-wake profiles are broadly normal. And so
let's dive into that then, because I know people take supplements of melatonin to fall asleep better. Then does that work in any way, or how does
for
it all
some
work?
people, but
and what
not
do people not understand?
Yeah, for some people and not all. If you take 3 milligrams of melatonin at bedtime, it can reduce your time it takes to get to sleep. So, and that ranges between 10 and 20 minutes, and that's some people, but not all people. So it can be effective in that way. But so, for example, there's some experiments as people age, they produce less melatonin, and that was said to be the reason why older people find sleep more difficult. And then when you give supplementary melatonin to those individuals, it doesn't have any effect upon their disturbed sleep. So it's a modulator. And one of the things that alarms me is that I was a study just published actually that people who routinely take melatonin to try and help them get off to sleep have a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, I think the causal links there are not clear, but that's one paper that has come out fairly recently. Where I am alarmed is that in the States in particular, a lot of parents are giving their children melatonin-laden gummies to get them off to sleep. And I think that's bad at a whole range of levels. Not least is because you shouldn't rely on a pharmacological, a supplement.
Or any external supplements.
You've just got to find the routine.
We didn't rely on them 1,000 years ago.
So why on earth, don't parents take their kids seriously and find behavioral ways in which you can enhance their sleep, rather than just...
They would argue it's just evolution and we're just finding better ways to be healthier.
Yeah, well, that's because they're excusing bad parenting. Oh, I'm sorry, that's going to cause a flood of
No, it's
but
good. I'm glad you said it.
I just despair. I mean, it's like everybody wants a pill to do something, and in fact, it's not difficult to get the sleep you need most of the time. Most people don't have a sleep problem. They have an anxiety or a stress issue, which is making sleep difficult to get to sleep, or
So
if they wake up.
sleep issues is a symptom.
Yeah. And it's finding ways to reduce anxiety and stress. And there's lots of ways, of course, that one can do that.
So you don't seem to be the lad that likes to take supplements when it comes to everyday life or sleep.
I can say,
Are there any ones that because I know magnesium glycinate, for example, is going around also a lot. What do you think of that?
Well,
and
in
are there any
fact,
others?
I think there are two areas. There's cannabinoid, and there's magnesium. And magnesium is known to enhance the impact of GABA, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain that is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it sort of reduces the output of the excitatory neurotransmitters. And so, for example, the Z drugs, Zopiclon and things like that, that's what they do. And so magnesium is one effect. It enhances natural GABA effectiveness, but it also is thought to interact with the serotonin systems and increase serotonin, which might help under certain circumstances. So there's some suggestion that magnesium might help. There's also, as I say, cannabinoid, and it interacts, with that part of the axis in the brain that relaxes you, and again, it's via the GABA systems. And so, yes, they could be useful. Why we should, I'd far rather, though, before we resorted to those sorts of supplements, is to work out behavioral changes that would allow you to take control. I think for me, it's about people having the confidence to embrace their sleep and take control of their sleep, rather than
And not be ashamed of it.
not be ashamed of it, or rely on some external factor to regulate their sleep behavior. I mean, it's really worth stressing that sleep is dynamic. It is variable, and some nights you're going to have to do get less sleep than others. That's the nature of life. But I'd far rather it was something that was in our control, that we used and manipulated, rather than an external source. And certainly, I mean, it's worth stressing that sleeping tablets, now GPs will only give a very short course of the Z drugs, because they do interact with the systems in the brain that help consolidate memory and process information. So they are not they don't provide a biological replicate of sleep. They act as sedatives. And a short course might be useful, but to use them as a way of trying to sedate yourself and try and mimic sleep is not a long-term healthy solution.
Because I've seen you mention cannabinoids. Because I feel like a lot of people also would say some other supplements help them to fall asleep, or even people would say alcohol helps them to fall asleep. I think it's also important to
alcohol is an
look at the pros and cons.
alcohol is an interesting one, because again, what alcohol does is enhance the effect of GABA on the brain.
GABA,
And of course, David Nutt has produced drinks which don't have alcohol in them, but they have an element which enhances GABA release, so you feel more relaxed. So you get the relaxation effects of an alcohol, but without the toxic effects of alcohol. So I think as long as you're staying within the government guidelines, and you're having, let's say,
what are the government guidelines?
I can't remember, they changed, but it's a number of units. I think is it 15 units a week, something like that, spread out over the week. Is it 50? I can't remember. You need to check that.
I'll double check that. No
And so as long as you're within that, I mean, it's fair to say that no level of alcohol is without danger, but keeping it low. And if it helps you relax, a small tot of whiskey in your nighttime cup of decaf tea or whatever, if that helps, then I'm not ferociously against it. I mean, the problem about alcohol is that, of course, you adapt to it. So you'll need not just a little tot, you'll need more and more.
Yeah.
And that then is a real problem.
Because I've also heard that alcohol disrupts sleep pretty
Oh
intensely and
yes.
might outweigh the pros
Yeah,
of actually having to rely on
excessive
it.
alcohol, there's no question. And in fact, you see in alcoholics, for example, um, and the level of deep sleep and REM sleep is hugely affected. And of course, these are really important elements of sleep, which influence the brain's functioning.
I want to go back to how the Western world has sort of lost respect for sleep, and we talked about it at the beginning, like, oh, I did it all nighter. Yeah, let's go. The same on social media. You see all these gurus in self improvement or entrepreneurship. They're sort of like preaching sleep less, and somehow the new generation sort of translates that as if I sleep less, I'll be successful,
It's
and we
appalling.
sort of have this badge of
I
honor
know.
for
Yeah.
sleeping less.
These influence drive me completely crazy. There's this. I mean, just this. I think there's something called it's where people actually have like 3 hours or 2 hours at night, and then they have like three 20-minute sleeps there, and I just think this is really dangerous. And I can't believe that. So there's the business sector is particularly bad at this. But of course, it's the members of the business sector with the highest incomes. So they have all the financial means to compensate for their appalling lack of behavior when they are chronically tired. But we just need to take on board that you will be less empathetic. Your ability to make decisions constructively will be reduced, and it's I think it's tantamount to dangerous for saying that people should just sleep deprive themselves.
So, what? Because I saw you mentioned that people that sleep about 2-3 hours and then they have more naps,
Yeah,
etc. So some form of polyphasic sleep.
polyphasic
And
sleep. Yeah.
obviously, I guess your research somehow just dismantles all
Well,
that and proves that it's just not
yeah, well,
sustainable.
I'm an author on a paper from the National Sleep Foundation, which is based in the States, and we looked at the literature on polyphasic sleep, as being suggested by these gurus, and not only is it not beneficial, it's harmful, and I just don't understand how they get away with it. I think it's deeply
Oh, no.
irresponsible.
There's so many. I mean, I've tried it myself. I fell into it. I think it was my first year of uni. I thought I need more time. And I tried it. There was like the Uberman.
Yes,
There's so
exactly.
many
Yeah,
names of
and yeah,
different combinations of, oh, we
yes,
should sleep 2 hours and awake for X.
yeah. So okay, but if we're realistic, when we were students, we've all done an all-nighter. We've all done, and actually, one night, working late into the night can be effective because you then focus in, and you're not distracted, and so occasionally it can be productive. But you have to realize the next day you won't be able to function efficiently. So if you need to do that sort of all-nighter to get the essay completed, and to get that difficult issue dealt with, okay. But as I said, don't have a difficult conversation the next day. Don't drive. Don't do anything that requires higher cognitive function. Also, be aware that you're going to have far. Your sense of humor will also be affected. So I'm not saying you can't. You have an occasional nighter. It's just not sensible, and be aware of the
I mean, you put
consequences.
really the finger on it, Russell, is that it's about nuance and it's about doing things in line with your own boundaries. And obviously, doing a one all-nighter, when you're in the extreme case where you have to do it, obviously, I think you also have to manage your time in a way that you don't have to pull these all-nighters. But if you're in the extreme situation where you have to do it, you must also take the precautionary measures the next day to recover as fast as you can, as effectively as you can from that all-nighter. So what's the real cost then of sacrificing sleep for ambition, Russell?
Well, I think sleep is what makes us a special animal. As we said, it's your ability to process information. It's your sense of humor. It's your ability to act as part of a team, to be a social animal. All the things that make us uniquely human are enhanced by sleep. And in a sense, not having sleep, you become blunted, and you can't allow the most complicated and wonderful structure in the known universe, the human brain, to function effectively. And in a sense, not sleeping properly and not allowing the brain to enhance its performance is tantamount to, I think, negligence.
Well said, because again, as I said, I see so many of my peers, and including myself, the last few years, seeing these people online talk about, sacrifice sleep, work more, etc. And I'm not here to say that working more is bad. Obviously, I think minimizing how much you work, but then maximizing the quantity you work
Yeah, and
is good.
completely, and it's about organizing your time. I mean, I remember as an undergraduate, for my revision for exams, I compartmentalized my time. And so rather than try and do revision at home, in a flat, I go to the library because I was focused then. I couldn't wander. I say, oh yeah, I'll just listen to the radio for a bit, or I'll just have another cup of coffee, and so you could be very productive in a shorter period of time. And it was all about organizing one's time and being efficient. And really what you want to do is then use the home environment as the place to relax, the place to wind down, and that will all enhance your ability to sleep and therefore the brain's performance during the exam the next day or whenever.
That's also something I think helped me a lot, is dissociate my bedroom from
Yes.
work. I used to work all the time in my bedroom,
Yeah.
and starting to treat my room as this is the room where I sleep, which is the name of the room, by the way. It's called bedroom for a reason,
Yeah.
right? Just keeping that room just for sleeping, I think it also helps the brain understand that once I'm in this room, it's time to chill out, it's time to wind
Exactly.
down, and it's time to sleep.
And if you, one of the things I've sort of, people who travel a lot, so I ask them to sort of define their sleeping space. So it might be a partner's aftershave or perfume, and a few drops of that on the pillow in the hotel or wherever it is, you then associate as the natural sleeping pace, and then and it's just sort of, it's again reinforcing those signals and de-stressing.
Exactly. And the thing is, because most people that say these things about sleep are just covering up their low discipline or lack of discipline when it comes to sleeping, because it is tremendously hard once you've stepped into bad habits for years over sleep and not putting as much importance as you should on it. And as you said, trying to reset it the next day and trying to wake up might be one of the hardest things imaginable.
Yes and no, but you wouldn't not clean your teeth and have fetid, ghastly breath, or you wouldn't not have a shower. There are lots of things that we do on a routine basis which we, regard as important, and yet we marginalize sleep. We don't prioritize it, and we have other things that we need to do, and we do them, which are potentially just as not as time consuming, but as onerous. So yeah, I think it's all a matter of embracing sleep. I mean, if we go back to the point earlier, sleep has been treated as this rather ugly monster that needs to be bludgeoned into
Nicholas
submission.
Tesla's quote about it? Do you remember Nikola Tesla's quote?
It was what's his name? The Edison, who said,
Edison.
And it was something along the lines of, sleep is a criminal waste of time and a throwback to our cave days. Yeah. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that there's now interesting studies suggesting that if you get very poor sleep in the middle years, it does act as a risk factor for developing dementia and Alzheimer's in later years. Everybody sort of says about Margaret Thatcher, oh, wasn't she extraordinary? She only slept And I've spoken to one of quite some time ago, but one of the people that worked with her said, yeah, it's true. She used to sleep very little. But what happened? She ended up with severe dementia in later years. And I'm not saying that poor sleep is going to cause dementia, but it could well be an important risk factor. And I think that's increasingly being recognized. You just don't want to.
I want to dive into that also very quickly. Is that because people think that sleeping is just about rest, but they tend to forget the whole mechanisms that happen when you sleep and the detoxification that happens in the brain, and how your body starts fasting for all those hours. And as you said, I think obviously as she slept so little, I guess the brain just accumulated these toxins that it wasn't allowed to manage. And
there are data from the lab showing even one night of no sleep, you can measure in the cerebral spinal fluid a small increase in beta amyloid, that misfolded protein, in the CSF.
What does that mean?
In the cerebral spinal fluid, so the fluid that circulates through the central nervous system, where beta amyloid is shunted before it's taken up and then clogs up cells. So you've got to get rid of it, and that's what sleep will allow, through this lymphatic system, allow you to do. It's really interesting. I mean, I think when these data first started emerging 10 years or so, we were all a bit skeptical. But from the mass studies and indeed empirical measurements in human, I think it's really quite clear that sleep is really important for that long-term mental health. And within the context of other areas of mental health, I mean, that's neurodegenerative disease. But what we have shown in young people who were showing really poor sleep and had high levels of paranoia and hallucinatory experiences, so they were on the psychosis spectrum. And what we were able to do, and this is a study led by my colleague Dan Freeman in psychiatry, was partially stabilize their sleep, and the levels of paranoia and hallucinatory experiences went down, showing that in ways we don't fully understand. I mean, some of the conditions of psychosis can be enhanced by poor sleep. Yes, so I mean, psychiatry is really taking this on board now and regarding sleep as almost like a new therapeutic option, which hasn't been embraced until now. It's always been thought, well, they've got mental health problems. I remember I got into this because I was with a psychiatrist in a lift, and he said to me, "Oh, you work on sleep, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, all my patients with schizophrenia have awful sleep. That's because they don't have a job. So they go to bed late, get up late, miss my clinic, and don't have friends." And I thought it was such a stupid thing to say. We then started studying, the sleep wake of individuals with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and their sleep wake patterns were absolutely smashed, and they were completely different from when we looked at unemployed individuals and employed individuals. And so in schizophrenia there was a real issue, and partial consolidation of sleep can actually reduce the severity of the psychiatric outcomes.
I think it just all goes back to what we talked about before we started, is that there's just simply not enough education about this, and we just lost the importance of what sleep is. And as I said, I just see people around me and they just go so quick to sacrifice sleep when it should be the last thing you touch. Because I mean, I'm sure there's loads of entrepreneurs that claim they sleep a little, but I'm sure they sleep way more than they admit to it.
That's true.
And I think it goes back to the quote you finished off on your TED Talk 12 years ago, which was by Jim Butcher, I think, which was "Sleep is God, go worship."
I forgot I said that. Yeah, God, that was good. It's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah. Yes, I mean, we've struggled with this, with trying to get this into the schools. And the other area which I think we should touch on is that night shift work. Now, yeah, it's bad, it's awful, but it would be naive of me to say we shouldn't have a society without night shift work. I mean, our frontline, staff in hospitals, our ambulance crews, our police, we have to have some night shift work. But the key thing is that there are ways of mitigating some of the problems of night shift work. I mean, there's a
what are those ways?
I mean, it's so. For example, you get higher rates of coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes. What do we give our night shift workers to eat on the night shift? It's high fat, it's high sugar, it's vending machines full. Why hasn't the UK food industry is one of the best in the world. Why have we not developed a high protein, low fat, low sugar sort of thing for night shift workers? If knowing that there's higher rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, mental health, because why aren't we having routine healthcare checks for those vulnerable individuals to catch these conditions before they become chronic and out of control? I mean, the divorce...
I don't think we're ready for the answer to that.
Well, the divorce rate in some sectors of the night shift can be 6 times higher than the day shift. We should not only be educated...
And night shift represents like almost a fifth of the total population working force?
Yeah, about 20%, something like that, yeah. And so I remember when I was talking about this stuff to the mining sector in the Pilbara in northwest Australia, and we said, about all the problems and the difficulties, and this woman in the audience burst into tears, and she said, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I've been so mean to my husband. I didn't realize that, it's not him turning into a monster, but this is a consequence of essentially
Or
driving
playing with
your
your
biology.
biology.
Yeah. And so there's a fascinating study showing that night shift workers who eat well and do exercise can reduce their chances of developing type 2 diabetes hugely, almost to baseline levels. And so, we need to get this information out there. As I say, you can't say we're not going to have night shift work. I mean, we could probably reduce it under certain circumstances, but we're always going to need. And I've spoken to members of the police force and just devastated that one of his colleagues was driving home after the night shift, went off the road, crashed into a tree, was killed, and they were not given any advice about the dangers of driving home after the night shift. And so, for example, you can the high-end cars now have devices in them telling you that you're going to nod off or the car is moving laterally. But you can get apps downloaded onto your smartphone which can detect if you're nodding and falling off to sleep. And we should be using those routinely in individuals after the night shift or who are driving tired. So there's a lot we can do. And the other area which I think is interesting is that maybe, and I don't have the data to support this, but I think it's worth trying. If you do night shift work, let's say for 5 years, then you come off night shift work for 5 years and then can go back on. And so you don't build up all those really bad toxic and
Why specifically 5 years?
well,
Is that something you just estimated?
yeah,
or-
because we've got data that certainly after 5 years, things start to get bad. And so
Okay.
5 years would seem to be 4 or 5 years would seem to be a good cutoff. But the problem is most people don't enjoy doing night shift work. It just pays better. So there'd be financial implications which we'd have to deal with. On the other hand, when 20% of the workforce has increased cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, et cetera, the cost to the NHS of those conditions could be, is probably huge. So cycling people on and then off might be one way of doing it. I don't know. I mean, these are the things we need to think about, these things creatively.
Is there any way a night shift worker can completely mitigate every risk related to obviously working on the night shift? Or is there absolutely no way, as you said, they're not in sync with their circadian rhythm, so there's no amount of work you can put in to fix that?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be consequences, and the best you can hope for is to mitigate. But we talked about morning people and evening people. I mean, I don't understand why we don't chronotype the workforce. So those on the night shift are the late chronotypes. And the key thing is you shouldn't have a late chronotype on the morning shift. And so we could match the body clock type to the shift work pattern, and that's easy to do. I mean, simple questionnaires can define whether you're a late type or a morning type.
I was going to ask, how do you check if you're a morning or an evening type? Because I feel like a lot of people tend to hide behind the facade of, oh, I'm just a late L, when in fact they just have bad habits.
Yeah,
and
well, I think
sort of hiding behind
you're
that
true.
excuse.
I mean, I think you can. I mean, so for example, in the book I wrote called Lifetime, at the back there's a questionnaire, a scientifically validated questionnaire, not developed by us but others, to get a sense of what your chronotype is, and the questions were designed to try and dissociate, as you say, the bad habits person from the genuine owl. But as we were saying earlier, I mean, if you're a student and you're getting up late every morning and staying out in the late afternoon, early evening, you're going to push your biological clock to a later chronotype. And I think it's being aware of, again, the consequences of actions. That if you've got to be careful, you can't oversleep and miss that morning light. So you need ideally symmetrical light exposure, light around dawn, light around dusk.
Being a night owl or a morning bird, it basically just is a way to illustrate how early or late your circadian rhythm drifted in one or the other direction, right?
Yeah, it's the way it aligns with the light dark cycle, and it, it's basically as simple as that. So on average, you'd want to get up later and go to bed later than the standardized normal work schedules.
And what you're claiming is that people genetically are predisposed to be one or the other or on the
Yeah,
spectrum, and it can shift depending on your
there's
actions and factors in
absolutely
your life.
a genetic contribution to this. Most of us, 65% of us, are somewhere in the middle. But for the extreme larks, 10% or so, and the rest will be owls. I mean, 25%. There's a preponderance of late types compared to morning types. As I say, it will change with age and it will change with light exposure. So it's not completely fixed. And again, we have control over when we see light to some extent.
Your research also shows that transitions into and out of sleep are hypercritical. So how do people screw this up in the modern life? Obviously, you mentioned light, which I think you can touch on a bit on again here. Are there other things that people can do to make these transitions easier? Because I feel like people just expect to finish work, go to bed, and then just fall asleep, which isn't, and then they complain why they can't
Yeah,
sleep.
I think this is important. And so you're going into sleep, you need to have a lot of signals to the body explaining that's what's going to happen next. Because if you think about the biology of wakefulness, consciousness, and sleep, they're profoundly different. It's not as though you can just simply throw a switch. You need to wind down. You have to have a series of sort of habits, if you like, which prepare you into that mindset of now I'm going to sleep. And in fact, it's very interesting with kids with ADHD, where sleep is really difficult, and some of them have problems understanding that the transition from wake to sleep. And so that's why you have to have a very fixed schedule and that sort of nighttime ritual, so that they know that the next thing they need to do is go to sleep. But it can take a while, and that's why the habits of sometimes a warm milky drink, or sometimes a warm bath, or whatever it takes, a piece of music, a few pages of Jane Austen, and it's all about the things that we find relaxing, and of course what you can't do is as you already said, go from a busy work schedule and then get home late and expect to go to sleep immediately. It's great, of course, if you can do exercise, towards the end of the day, so you can sort of kind of burn off some of the stress and tension. You don't want to do it too close to bedtime, because what the exercise will do is increase core body temperature, and a higher core body temperature can make it more difficult to get off to sleep. Part of the transition.
I feel like you mentioned it was like maybe 90 minutes before bed is like the grand maximum.
Yeah, I think that's
feel like
about.
it's
I
something
mean,
you
I think it's a
mentioned.
rule of thumb. It will change between individuals, but part of going to sleep is a slight drop in core body temperature, and certainly if you can't get that, it is very much more difficult to get off to sleep.
I think you've said beautifully is that people tend to, and that's a big issue with self-improvement nowadays, is that they try to over-optimize things,
Yeah.
especially with their sleep, and they try and look for every little bit they can do before bed. But I think tailoring your own experience to various cues, like you said, like it could be a warm glass of milk with
Yeah.
honey or a few pages of Jane Austen. I think it's highly, as you say, well, it's the whole conversation we're having is super individualistic.
It is.
Isn't it?
And so, for example, I mean, for many couples, the only time they really get time to talk is when they're lying in bed at the end of the day. And, some of the topics that couples need to deal with is the family finances. And that's the last thing you should be discussing before you go to, I mean, it's a rule in our house, so we never discuss family finances. We
That's
make
also a rule in my house. It's always in the
yeah,
mornings.
you have to make time to do that kind of stuff, elsewhere. And it's about, having, I mean, I don't like rules and regulations at all, but it's sort of pointers and things that you should and shouldn't do, that will enhance your sleep. I mean, going back to the it's interesting that we've so much treated as this sort of sleep as this really rather naughty renegade animal that needs beating into submission, whereas in fact what it is a rather wonderfully cuddly teddy bear that needs to be embraced, and that's how you should think about sleep.
I feel like the more I feel like the more you fight sleep, the more it's going to bite you in the butt.
Absolutely.
And as you said, I feel like you have to embrace it and just let go and fall into it. I had another question. To what extent is waking up groggy normal? Because I feel like I associated the fact that once you're groggy, it means you just didn't sleep right. But I also feel like it might be a consequence of not having a proper transition to waking up. And I think it might be normal to a certain extent.
That's a good point. So there'd be a couple of things. If you have an alarm clock, that wakes you up, then it may wake you up in the wrong stage of sleep. So naturally, we wake from rapid eye movement sleep. And that's how we transition out. So ideally, we should wake naturally from REM sleep. But if you're in deep sleep, slow wave sleep, and the alarm clock, wakes you up, then you're in deep sleep, and it will take longer. You'll be feeling really groggy before you feel you can get out of bed and function properly. And of course, the other thing is, if you're not getting enough sleep, then it'll take a long time to wake up. So yeah, feeling groggy is probably indicating that you're either being woken up at the wrong phase of sleep, or quite simply, you're not getting the sleep that you need.
I love how you mentioned that feeling groggy can be a symptom of how you woke up in the wrong stage of sleep. And I feel like that's something also people don't understand, is that sleep, from what I've understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong, works in 90 minutes cycles.
Yeah, more or less.
Of deep and shallow sleep, REM sleep.
So we should describe it briefly, which is that you've got stages of non-REM sleep, and so what you see is that the brain, when it's awake, has very tiny amplitude, very high frequency oscillations, and that's what happens when you're really alert. And as you slide down into different stages, the deeper stages of non-REM sleep, the amplitude increases and the frequency decreases until you're in deep sleep, or where there's slow rolling waves of sleep. And that's where memory consolidation, the processing of information, occurs. Then there's a very rapid jump from deep sleep up into REM sleep. And
which is rapid eye movement.
Rapid eye movement sleep. And it's also called paradoxical sleep, because the electrical activity that you see in the brain is very like the wake state. And you have to therefore also measure not just the electrical activity on the brain, but whether the eyes are showing this sort of oscillation, rapid eye movement, and also the muscular tension is also measured. And that's how you can tell somebody's not awake versus in REM sleep. Now, REM sleep has gone backwards and forwards about why it's important. And of course, it's where we have our most vivid and complicated dreams. And it's been associated with, REM sleep has been associated with processing our emotional sort of brain state. And there was a very interesting study looking at dream content in individuals who had been in New York after the Twin Towers were destroyed. And what was noted is that the content of dreams was not planes crashing into buildings, but it was being overwhelmed by a tsunami or being mugged. And so it seems that the brain is trying to deal with its anxiety by sort of trying to make sense of its world with these sorts of experiences, these dream experiences. It's not clear. But certainly individuals...
That's super interesting.
Yeah, so people have been selectively deprived of REM sleep show much greater levels of anxiety during the day. Now, again, it's not a great experiment, but it does seem to suggest that its REM sleep is particularly associated with us trying to deal with our emotional issues.
Is there a split? We should, obviously it's beyond our control, but is there a perfect split of REM sleep, deep sleep, shallow sleep?
Well, it's interesting. It's under the influence of the circadian systems. So the first part of a sleep episode tends to have several seconds, and of course you go through that REM, non-REM every 70 to 90 minutes. And so there tends to be, during the first half of sleep, more deep sleep. And then during the second half of the sleep episode, more rapid eye movement, REM sleep. So yeah, it is structured. And it can certainly vary as we age.
Would you recommend people to try and track their sleep and try and wake up when they're in shallow sleep? Or does that come naturally with just adopting a new sleep cycle and just waking up and going to bed at the same time every day?
I'm pretty down on sleep trackers. I mean, there are devices which detect whether you're in REM sleep, and they will trigger an alarm clock so that you're waking during the stage of sleep when you're most likely to wake. But these trackers are most of the time pretty inaccurate. And I think they actually are they can breed increased anxiety. So, I mean, I remember somebody coming...
What levels of inaccuracy are we talking about? Are we talking about a few 10%, or are we going up to the full 50?
It can be completely wrong, and particularly when they start saying, you had a good night's sleep, or you didn't get enough REM sleep with it, they can be really badly wrong. But it's worth bearing in mind, you see, at the moment they're based upon a single algorithm that was derived from 8 California undergraduates. I mean, and so the structure of sleep changes, so that what algorithm that will work for a young person in their 20s is not going to work for somebody who's younger or older. And so I think with the increase in AI, we're going to have much more dynamic algorithms that can track sleep more accurately. But at the moment, they seem to be, in my experience, another source of anxiety. And here's an extreme example, but one person came up to me and said, I'm not sure I believe in slow wave sleep. And I said, why? And they said, well, my sleep tracker doesn't seem to be, recording that I get much slow wave sleep. And I said, okay. And he said, and I said, well, they're really inaccurate. I wouldn't worry about it, And he said, no, what I do is that I wake myself up, I set the alarm for 3 o'clock to find out how much slow wave sleep I've actually had. And this is taking sleep obsession to the extreme. And of course, a good friend of mine, Ken Wright, in University of Colorado, has a big undergraduate sleep class. And at the beginning of the class, he says, okay, who here has ever used some form of sleep tracker? And most of the hands in the audience go up. And he then says, well, who now is still using that same tracker? And only about 2 hands remain. And what happens routinely is that people think, oh, I'm not getting good sleep, I might as well track it, not realizing that it's a complete waste of time. And then they realize that their personal experience, their individual experience, bears no resemblance with the garbage that's coming out from the tracker. And so after 6 months, it's shoved in the drawer. And of course, the commercial cycle is you keep on selling sleep trackers, as people, discover that they don't feel as though they're sleeping that they need. So I think they could have a use. So, for example, in the same way that if you want to lose weight, you change your eating habits. You weigh yourself in the morning, you see you've lost weight, it reinforces your eating habits. And they could be, if you wanted to get longer sleep, it could be useful because you do things, you wind down, you plan, you embrace sleep, and then you do those behavioral changes and you actually see, yeah, I've had longer sleep. So it's working. So in that sense, they could be useful, but they're not used really like that. I met a couple of identical twins. It was hilarious because they had the same sleep tracker. And they would ring themselves, they were intensely competitive, and they'd ring each other up in the morning and say, well, how much REM sleep did you get last night? And they would compete. And anyway, don't take them seriously. Bit of fun. They will get better. They will be useful, but at the moment, they're not.
Yeah, from my experience, I've had this old Apple Watch, which might be like a Series 3 or 4, which came out in like 2017 or 18. And I've realized that I've paired it with this app that started telling me, oh, you have this much, and you've dreamt there. I was like, how do you know if I've dreamt or not? And I think the only use case I see to these things is basically the amount of time you sleep, which is what you mentioned.
Sleep duration, that can be pretty good. And of course,
exactly.
If getting up in the middle of the night is a problem. But the thing is, when you get up, and there's we talk about polyphasic sleep as influence talk about it, but that's the incorrect term, because there's a very interesting individual called Richard Iffrig who is a historian, and he's gone through historical records looking at sleep patterns, way back, and it seems that given the opportunity, that most people have what's called a biphasic sleep. So they go to sleep, they'll be asleep for a while, they'll wake up, and then they go back to sleep again. And in fact, after those historical records were published, Tom Weir set this up in the lab. He had young people and he gave them the opportunity to sleep 12 hours, dark 12 hours, light for 12 hours, and they developed a biphasic sleep pattern. But because most people don't know about this, they'll think, oh my God, I've woken up, I'm never going to get back to sleep again, I may as well start drinking coffee and doing emails. Whereas if they stay calm and find something relaxing, then chances are they will fall back to sleep. And again, it's that anxiety issue and stress. Stay calm. It's also like looking at the alarm clock. I mean, many people have an illuminated alarm clock, which can be not a great idea, because you wake up and you say, oh goodness, there's only 2 hours before the alarm goes off. And then that causes them stress. And it doesn't actually matter whether it's 2 hours or it could be 20 minutes. It's actually where the alarm goes off. So you just need to not stress about that sort of thing. Yes.
I want to go now into how people can actually fix these things. For example, if someone's sleep schedule is completely misaligned, what's the fastest way to reset it? Because there's so many different ways, and I've tried them myself. There's loads on, Reddit, X. Like, for example, there's like, doing an all-nighter, and then hopefully I'll be tired enough to go to bed earlier.
It's interesting because certainly sleep deprivation has been shown to promote sleep, no surprise there, and actually can knock you into a better sleep-wake pattern. But it's not reliable, and it's something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because the consequences of not getting sleep ripple through every aspect of what we do. I think it's about structure. It's for me, it's getting that morning light exposure. It's winding down. It's developing those habits that work for you, and also not to be intimidated by the behavior of others. So for example, if you're a morning type and you go out on a Friday, all your mates were going to say, oh no, you've got to stay up and do all this late night stuff. You've got to have the strength to stay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that can be a real issue. And morning types hate it because they're all, classified as party poopers. And actually they just want to get some sleep. Yeah.
But then, for example, say I'm going to bed at like 3 a.m. and starting to wake up at like 10, 11. What would you recommend to go back into your normal routine? Would you do like gradual bedtime advancements by increments of 15, 30, 60 minutes? Is that the best one?
I think that's right. And make sure that when you do get out of bed, you get that light, whether it's from a light box or go outside, because that will advance the clock and make it easier for you to get up the next morning.
Yeah, I just wanted to have your quick opinion on what you thought about napping.
Oh, napping is important.
Think about napping.
If it's a really interesting area. A short 20-minute nap can be very useful for enhancing your productivity after the nap. The problem is, if it's longer than 20 minutes, you can fall into deeper sleep, and that can be counterproductive. You really want to wake up from stage 1, stage 2, not 3 or 4, because then you go back to the point you were making about grogginess. So yes, short nap, good. Make you more effective for the second half of the day. The problem is, and this is classically seen in teenagers, that they go to bed they go to sleep really late. So they've had short nighttime sleep. They then struggle through the school day and literally falling asleep at the school desk. They get home and then they'll take a 2-hour sleep, which is relatively close to bedtime, which pushes back the pressure to sleep that night. And so you can fall into a rather nasty cycle of shorter nighttime sleep and longer late afternoon nap, making you completely unfunctional during the first half of the day. So short 20-minute nap, okay, time to time, don't worry about it. Longer, be very careful, because it can be counterproductive.
Okay. Here's my final question for you, Russell. If the world ignored everything you've discovered about sleep tomorrow, and you could fix only one thing in society's relationship with sleep, what would it be? And what does it matter more than sleep itself?
Oh, goodness. I mean, what I would say is that we just need people to take their individual sleep seriously. I mean, in the same way that we think about personal hygiene and all the other sorts of things that we kind of do, then sleep should be prioritized. It must be regarded as a pillar of health. And by embracing sleep, all the wonderful things about being human are enhanced. As I say, it's so good to have a laugh, and our sense of humor is improved by a good night of sleep. It's good to solve problems. It's good to interact with others. All of those special things are enhanced by sleep. So what's not to love about it?
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I know it's short, but it was such an interesting talk.
Thank you.
You're so passionate about your topics, and I think the amount of work you've provided to the science of sleep is absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for your time.
That's extremely kind. I appreciate that, Jan.
Yeah. Because I don't think you've had many 20-year-olds interview you for a podcast. So
I don't think so. No.
Appreciate
well,
coming.
Delighted. Well,
yeah.
I think it's great that you're interested, and I was delighted to be able to help. And I thought you made the whole process very easy. It was fun. So thank you.